G'day, Angie Mahar here. On the topic of borderline personality and splitting, because there is a little bit more to this than maybe a lot of people talk about, and it's talked about in ways as if splitting is so dependent on one thing or another, or what you do or say or don't do or say, or more to the point, I've heard it said that, oh, the borderline's gonna split as soon as they realize it that you love them as soon as they feel your love. Nothing could be further from the truth. So what's really up with borderline personality disorder and splitting? It is, first and foremostly, the most major defense mechanism within borderline personality, and it starts at a very young age when things aren't going the way that they optimally should for somebody who's going to get through the healthy stages of development. So in the beginning, with the infant and the mother's space that is the world, or as Freud said, the first love object, and John Bradshaw said mother's face is the world, to the infant, we're sort of wired and for that attunement, and we need it to be able to grow and go through the stages of early childhood in a healthy way. So for people who get diagnosed with BPD, what happens is that there's usually intermittent reinforcement or a very angry or stressed mother, often with BPD herself or NPD or comorbidity both. And what the child experiences is that looking at the face of the mother when it isn't mirroring back the attunement and something peaceful and something happy and like, hey. That's why people coo at babies and smile at babies and change their voices when they're talking to babies, right? Because it's all to get their attention and it's all soothing and it's what really young infants need. But what happens to people more often than not, like 80 to 87% of people go on to be diagnosed with BPD, this isn't what they experience in childhood. So whatever the mother's doing in the 80 to 87%, likely often, not always, but usually, often a mother with BPD herself, or like I said, a narcissist, they just aren't mirroring back to the child what the child really needs for survival, and it becomes unsafe. And in the beginning of infancy, there's no cognition, there's no, And so what happens is that the child, as Bradshaw said about anger, for example, well, the child will set negativity or that which threatens on a biological level, feeling safe or safety and or survival, gets set aside, set aside, set aside. So it means it's being put outside of, quote, self, unquote. And then what happens is that the split takes place for those who are going to have a diagnosis of BPD. The split takes place really early, often in infancy. And what it is that sometimes a good mother shows up, good other object, and sometimes a really angry, stressed, or depressed, or even just worn out, tired mother shows up. And one, the infant needs the mirroring, the attunement, like to be, because the child, the infant is going to take the cue in a biological way, whether mother looks like it looks, you quote, safe, but an infant, it's really about, does it threaten survival or does it satiate needs? And so this split really starts to happen early between good object, bad object, but not in the way that it will develop as the child gets a bit older, but before the age of 2. So splitting in BPD is really the most major defense mechanism, and it starts in infancy, and it starts with a threat to survival on a biological level for an infant, and it's when and it's before a human being can make any choice or decision or understand that one thing that feels like a threat to survival, one face, one attitude from mother, and mother in a different mood can mean things are safe or survival is ensured. There's no way for an infant to parse that. So it just becomes a matter of a reaction on a biological level to bad object versus good object. So there's a split that happens right there at that level to begin with. primitive function and where it starts in a really primitive time in life, it is protection against unmet needs, protection for survival against the threat, literal threat of feeling like one isn't going to survive. First, the infant on a biological level, and later a toddler and a kid growing up on a psychological, emotional, on every level. So this is a major thing in BPD, and people with BPD don't split because you do thing A, B, C, D, or you didn't do thing, E, F, G, or you said this or you didn't say that. Their triggers are internal already, and it may look like they're responding to you, but the triggers are internal, and it's not really what you do or didn't do or what you say. So the other thing about splitting in borderline personality as the major defense mechanism that it is, it needs to be understood, I believe, maybe more by some people, is it's unconscious. It's a knee-jerk protective response. And it gets developed, like I said, in primal stages of infancy. It is not in the conscious mind. And therefore, to say, for example, that a borderline is splitting because you said this or you said that, no. And to say that they're splitting because, they just got your love. They just started to receive your love, and then they had to split you to devaluation because they can't handle. No, because they don't love, they can't love, they don't attach untreated. This is, of course. So the reality is, it's not that all of a sudden, intimacy in a way is scary for them, for sure, and closeness. There's the push-pull, the approach avoidance struggle, because, as I mentioned in my last video, people with BPD do not get, before the emotional arrested development and the loss of self, they don't get to the rapprochement phase of early childhood development. They don't get to the separation individuation phase. So everything is going to trigger them, and everything is a repetition compulsion. It's a reenactment of those early years and of the original splitting as a defense. And so there's nothing conscious about it. It just happens. It's sort of like this automatic, well, largely negative to people in relationships, and for people with BPD and the people close to them in relationships in adulthood, it's an automatic negative protective response. And so people are not with BPD splitting because all of a sudden they receive your love, or they feel your love, or you're being kind to them, they don't know what to do with it. Well, that's not really true about splitting. Splitting is more primal. Splitting is also very much just unconscious, and it happens automatically. So there's other aspects of things that people with BPD can respond negatively to or be triggered by, and then the splitting will occur. But most splitting happens just like that. And there's no conscious process for people that are untreated with BPD as to why they split. And that's a major thing to understand. When a person with BPD is splitting, and then all kinds of stuff happens, right? Projective identification, they're externalizing the dissociated reenactment, all those feelings that they don't understand or know what they're about. And when that's happening for them, they can hurl a lot of stuff at you, and it can mean rage, anger and rage, or it can mean the silent treatment. But here's the key thing that people don't understand usually on the other side of somebody with BPD in a relationship with them. When you're really close to them, it's not personal. Obviously, you're going to feel it, and it's aimed at you, and it seems personal. But again, as people are after these relationships, stuck in all the places people get stuck in, cognitive dissonance, rumination, etc. Well, it's really important to remember or to know firstly, and then recall for yourself during those times that it wasn't personal. And it was about object other relating. It was about you being in the parent role, and it wasn't even about you. But yes, you incurred the damage, and you're the one that's really hurt. and the shock factor of thinking that you met somebody terrific and this is a person you fall in love with, and then all of a sudden they're not that person. I mean, it requires a lot of recovery. And of course, a lot of people have codependency, and I've talked about that. And I'm out here to work with you on the inner child healing, family of origin work, self differentiation. Um, and I'm also out here, to heal from codependency in these relationships. Splitting is not personal, and it is not so situationally defined in the here and now as people think it is. But I understand that you're going to take it personally. You're on the other side of it. But it's really important to know that this is happening automatically for the person with BPD. And what that means is that it's not personal, and yeah, they'll add intellect to these feelings that they don't understand, and they'll shoot a lot of things and project a lot onto you and say a lot of really hurtful stuff. And I'm not saying that's you're going to absorb that, you do, and it's really so hurtful and beyond. But what you need to know in retrospect is it wasn't about you at all, and you didn't cause it, and you're you're not the quote bad guy unquote. And there's nothing that you could have done differently. Really important for people to understand that. Too many people with codependency might still be believing, whether in the relationship or you're the ex or there's still contact or whatever the situation, you may still really believe there's something more you should have done, could have done, wish you would have done, that somehow you could have changed what is, or even if you're still in the relationship, that you can make it better. It just isn't true. There's no way to help a person with borderline personality when they're untreated and when they're splitting. You can't get through to them, and you can't just set boundaries, and you can't just try this, that, the other thing, because nothing's going to work with the untreated borderline in the midst of the most primal defense mechanism there is in BPD, splitting. That's what a lot of people with codependency try to do. We try to take responsibility for, well, why are they in this mood now? Why are they screaming at me? Why did they just walk away? Why won't they talk to me? You might get the silent treatment that now have evolved more so over the last few years or longer into ghostings. Ghostings that don't necessarily mean that the person with BPD means it for it to be an end, but how are you supposed to know that? And they just, they ghost, or they just won't call you, or they won't answer your text, or, if it's long distance, it's much more complicated. But sometimes even in the same house, they just will go somewhere and shut and lock a door, and that's it. And so whether it's the outward expression of this or the more internalized one, people with codependency just notoriously take this very personally. It's very understandable why. But splitting in BPD is a primitive defense, the major central core defense mechanism happens like that, not in their conscious control and not personal as you experience it as being. So you still get hurt by what they fire at you after the split, and when they're having all these emotions dissociated, they've been triggered. But it's not happening because it's not related to the here and now. They get triggered, and then they split to the evaluation, and then they can do the silent treatment, or they can rage at you. But it's not related to what you just did or didn't do. It might seem like it, right? You come home 5 minutes late, and it's like, and you're hearing about it, but that split happens because of what they're feeling as a result of what happened, if even that, or it could be more of a flooding of emotion from the past in the repetition compulsion sense. And so it's really not about what you do or you don't do. And what my 2 cents worth is, if somebody's untreated and not in therapy, if they're well treated and have a lot of treatment and they can be talked to and they understand, different. But if not, there's nothing you can do. And I get asked a lot by clients, and I think it's been asked on live streams and comments on the channel, well, how do I help the person with BPD who's splitting? Like, how do I help them calm down? Or how do I help them get out of the anger or whatever it is? You can't, and you don't. And you don't even try. Why? Because that's codependency again. You're trying to help them, rescue them, fix them, so it can be better for you too. But you can't stop that once it happens. It is an automatic, protective, unconscious defense mechanism and borderline personality. So people that ascribe it to, oh, all of a sudden they feel your love, and then they have to split into value because they want to destroy you. It's nothing like that. But it doesn't mean that on the other side of people with BPD, especially untreated, that you're not going to go through a living nightmare, because it is a relational impossibility, and you're going to feel hurt. You're going to take on the hurt, but it's not about you. And it's not about what you did or you didn't do, though they'll say words like that. But splitting in BPD is much more primitive, much more primal, happens like that with triggered dysregulated emotions, the reenactment, what they're refeeling in the here and now. And yeah, they'll pick here and now things to hurl at you and say you did or didn't do, or that's the whole reason that they're in this place now screaming at you or whatever. But it isn't. And what it is that the person with BPD untreated doesn't know why they're feeling all what they're feeling. So they ascribe it to the person closest to them. There's nothing right or okay about that. But that's how that works. That's how knee-jerk and unconscious that works. In the defense mechanism, splitting, which is the major one in BPD. And I know I've done other videos, and you've probably seen a ton of videos on this, and you probably know, splitting, I know all about it. But please consider these points I made in this video, because it's really important to know that they get triggered, emotion dysregulated, somewhat of dissociation comes in, they're re-experiencing something from the past in the here and now, and they might, from the intellect, be able to fire at you words about something recently, or you're 5 minutes coming home for late from work, or, well, how come that woman friend of yours texted you, etc., and accusations. But that's not really what it's about. That's the noise. That's the projection. That's what people with BPD try to make it about, because they're externalizing out. It ends up that, yeah, they're just blaming you. But it has nothing to do with what they're really going through. And they will be the last people to know that. So I hope that was helpful. Take care.